Altaussee, Austrian Alps. May 3rd, 1945. 7 a.m. The mountain doesn't look like it's hiding anything. The Totes Geberge Range rises above the village of Altaussee in the Salzkammergut. White peaks, dark pine forests, a lake the color of cold steel in the early morning. The air is clean and thin and carries the smell of pine resin and melting snow. A postcard, a painting. That's the point. Somewhere inside this mountain, behind a steel door set into the rock face at the end of a salt mine tunnel that runs 200 meters deep, is the largest single collection of stolen art in human history. Paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Michelangelo, Jan van Eyck's Ghent Altarpiece, dismantled panel by panel and wrapped in protective cloth. Thousands of individual pieces looted from museums, private collections, and the homes of murdered Jewish families across occupied Europe. And somewhere in the tunnels alongside the art, there are 8 enormous wooden crates marked with a single word that the mine workers who placed them there were told meant something other than what it actually means. The word is marble. The crates contain bombs. To understand how the art got here, you have to understand the man who put it here. Adolf Hitler was not simply a dictator with aesthetic pretensions. He was a failed artist, rejected twice by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, who spent the rest of his life constructing a vision of cultural supremacy that was inseparable from his political program. Art was not decoration to Hitler. It was proof of racial hierarchy, of civilizational achievement, of Germany's right to dominate Europe. His plan was the Führermuseum, a vast cultural institution to be built in Linz, his Austrian hometown. The greatest art museum in the world, housing the greatest collection in the world, assembled by the most powerful state in the world. The building was designed by architect Hermann Giesler. The acquisitions were supervised by Hans Paasi, then by Hermann Voss. The acquisitions method was simple: conquest. As German forces occupied country after country, teams of art experts, the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, the Kunstschutz, individual commanders with personal ambitions, systematically stripped museums, galleries, churches, and private collections. In France alone, over 22,000 objects were seized. In the Netherlands, in Poland, in the Soviet Union, the numbers were greater. The best pieces, the ones destined for the Führermuseum, came to Altaussee. The Altaussee salt mine had been operating since the 14th century. Salt mining requires stable temperatures, low humidity, and minimal vibration, conditions that, entirely by coincidence, are also ideal for the long-term preservation of oil paintings, wooden panels, and paper documents. The mine's interior maintained a constant temperature of 8 degrees Celsius and a humidity level that conservators today would regard as near perfect. By 1943, with Allied bombing of German cities intensifying, the art intended for the Führermuseum began moving to Altaussee for safekeeping. The operation was managed by the Austrian Museum director Emmerich Pochmüller and overseen by Berlin's art bureaucracy. Crate by crate, panel by panel, the collection grew. At its peak, the Altaussee mine contained over 6,500 paintings, including Vermeer's The Astronomer, Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges, and what was potentially the largest single Rembrandt collection ever assembled in one location. There were also sculptures, tapestries, furniture, rare books, and the personal art collection of Hermann Göring, who had conducted his own parallel looting operation across Europe. The total estimated value in today's terms, over $4 billion. All of it underground, in the dark, in the perfect cold of an Austrian salt mountain. In the spring of 1945, the SS arrives. Gauleiter August Eigruber of Upper Austria is a true believer, one of the most fanatical Nazi administrators in the Reich. As Allied forces advance into Austria from the west and Soviet forces push from the east, Eigruber receives what he interprets as authorization from Hitler's inner circle to implement the Nero Decree, the policy of total destruction, leaving nothing of value for the enemy. In late April, 8 large wooden crates are delivered to the Altaussee mine, marked Marmor. Each crate contains a 500-kilogram Luftwaffe bomb. The intent is clear. When the time comes, the bombs will be detonated inside the mine, collapsing the tunnels, destroying the art, and denying the collection to the advancing Allies. For $1 billion in irreplaceable human culture, gone. The mine workers, Austrian locals who have spent their lives in these tunnels, find out what is in the crates. The mine's director, Emmerich Pochmüller, faces a decision that puts his life in direct conflict with the order of a still-functioning SS apparatus that shoots people for less than what he is considering. he decides to act. What follows is one of the most extraordinary acts of cultural resistance in the war. Pochmuller and the mine's chief engineer, Albrecht Gaiswinkler, who is also, secretly, an Austrian resistance operative with connections to the OSS, the American Intelligence Service, begin working against Eingruber's orders with a combination of bureaucratic delay, outright deception, and physical sabotage. The bombs are moved deeper into the mine on the pretense of routine repositioning. Then, in the first days of May, the mine workers removed the bombs from the mine entirely, an act performed at night, under the noses of the SS, by men who knew that if they were caught, they would be executed on the spot. Simultaneously, Gaiswinkler contacts American forces advancing through Bavaria and Austria, providing them with the location of the mine and the nature of its contents. The message reaches the unit that will become the most famous in art recovery history, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section of the Allied forces, the Monuments Men. On May 8, 1945, the same day Germany formally surrenders, American forces reach Altaussee. The mine is intact. The bombs are gone. The art is safe. What the Monuments Men find inside the mountain is beyond anything they expected. The first teams enter the mine on May 10th, their flashlights moving across crates stacked in carved salt chambers that extend hundreds of meters into the mountain. The scale is incomprehensible at first. Room after room, painting after painting. The work of centuries, assembled in the dark by an ideology that claimed to honor it while looting it from its owners. Captain Robert Posey and Private Lincoln Kirstein, a sculptor and a future founder of the New York City Ballet, both now serving as Monuments Men, are among the first Americans to walk through the collection. Kirstein later wrote that he wept when he saw the Ghent Altarpiece, not from joy, but from something harder to name, the collision of beauty and atrocity in the same physical space. The recovery operation takes months. Each piece must be cataloged, examined for damage, and carefully extracted from the mine. Some of the larger panels require custom-built stretchers. The Ghent Altarpiece alone, dismantled into its component panels by the Nazis for transport, requires expert conservators to verify that each piece has survived the journey and the storage intact. Over 6,500 objects are eventually recovered from Altaussee. It becomes the largest single art recovery in history. The question of what to do with 6,500 looted artworks is not simple. The Monuments Men and the Allied government establish a collection point at Munich's central collecting point, where recovered art is cataloged and assessed for provenance. Works that can be attributed to legitimate owners, museums, national collections, private collectors, are returned. The process is slow, politically complicated, and frequently unjust. Many of the private collectors whose art ended up at Altaussee were Jewish families murdered in the Holocaust. Their heirs, scattered across the world by the diaspora of survival, had to navigate complex legal and bureaucratic systems to claim what had been stolen from their families. Many claims took decades. Some are still unresolved today. The Ghent Altarpiece was returned to Belgium's St. Bavo Cathedral in 1945 and has remained there since. The Vermeer went to the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges was returned to its church in Belgium, where it remains. Göring's personal collection, which he had stolen from across Europe and stored partly at Altaussee, was broken up. Some pieces returned to their countries of origin. Others entered American museum collections in ways that continue to generate legal disputes. Altaussee today is a quiet village. The salt mine is a tourist attraction. Visitors in hard hats ride the same narrow-gauge mine train that carried art crates in 1945, moving through the same carved salt chambers where the Monuments Men walked with flashlights. The tour guides explain what was stored here. They show where the bomb crate stood. They describe the decision that Pochmuller made. The mine smells of salt and cold stone. The temperature is 8 degrees, exactly as it was when the paintings hung in the chambers above you. The story of Altaussee sits at the intersection of the worst and the best of human capacity. The worst, a genocidal regime that stole the cultural heritage of murdered peoples and stored it underground to serve a dead man's architectural fantasy. The best, a mine director and a resistance operative who risked execution to save what could be saved, and a group of soldiers who cared enough about civilization to treat its objects as worth fighting for. The art was recovered. Most of it was returned. The mountain kept it secret for 3 years and then gave it back. Some of the owners never came to collect what was theirs. They were gone. But the work remained, proof that beauty survives even when the people who made it, or owned it, or loved it, Do not.